I need to check the used names list and then write the story. The names to avoid are all listed in the file. Let me craft completely new names for a Canadian setting story. New characters: narrator, Lawrence, Larry. Retired, 63, former civil engineer wife, Kathleen. Kathy, daughter. Nadine, son-in-law. Stefan Kowalczyk, son. Ali Joel, fake financial advisor. Preston Gilmore, now writing the full story, 5,000 words. First person, Canadian context. Memoir voice. I wasn't supposed to be home until Sunday. That's the part I keep coming back to. If the transmission on Joel's truck hadn't died somewhere outside Sudbury, if he hadn't called me Thursday morning instead of Friday, if I hadn't decided to just drive myself up early and surprise Kathleen, none of what happened next would have unfolded the way it did. Or maybe it would have, just without me there to stop it. We bought the cottage 31 years ago. It wasn't much then. A 2-bedroom place on a narrow lot off a gravel road north of Parry Sound. The kind of listing that sits on MLS for 8 months because the dock was rotting and the well needed work, and the previous owners had covered every wall in dark wood paneling that made the inside feel like the inside of a shoebox. Kathleen looked at it for about 4 minutes and said, "This is it." I trusted her then. I still do. We fixed it ourselves, mostly. Summers. Long weekends, the odd week in October when the kids were in school, and we'd drive up, just the two of us, and work on something. New deck. New duct. A proper kitchen. I re-insulated the whole north wall myself the winter I turned 52, and I was proud of that in a way I never was about the engineering projects I managed for 30 years. Those were other people's bridges, other people's roads. This was ours. We planned to retire there eventually. Full-time, maybe. The grandchildren would learn to fish off that dock. Kathleen talked about a vegetable garden. I thought about mornings with coffee and absolutely nowhere to be. It was supposed to be ours for the rest of our lives. That Thursday in early October, Canadian Thanksgiving weekend, I loaded my truck in the driveway at 6 in the morning and headed north. Joel had already made other arrangements once his truck was towed. He'd come up Saturday with his family as planned. No need to wait. I called Kathleen on the drive, but she didn't pick up, which I figured meant she was already out on the dock with her book. She does that. Phone inside, herself outside. I've always loved that about her. I pulled up the gravel road just after 10. The leaves were full peak, the kind of red and orange that makes you understand why people come from other countries just to stand in a parking lot and look at trees. I had the windows down. I was in a good mood. I was thinking about the Thanksgiving dinner Kathleen had been planning, and whether I'd have time to split the rest of the firewood before the others arrived. Her car was there. Stefan's car was there too, which surprised me. He and Nadine weren't supposed to come until tomorrow. I figured plans had changed. Maybe Nadine wanted extra time with her mother. They'd been closer lately, or so Kathleen had mentioned. I came in through the side entrance, the mudroom we call it, though it's really just a narrow hall with hooks and a rubber mat, and I heard voices immediately, not from the kitchen, from somewhere further in. I set my bag down without thinking, quietly, the way you do when you don't want to interrupt something. That's when I heard Kathleen crying. Not weeping. Not the kind of crying that comes from a sad movie or a phone call about someone's diagnosis. This was a quieter thing, worse somehow. A sound like a person who has been crying for a long time and has mostly run out of it. A sound I had not heard from my wife in 37 years of marriage. I moved toward it without making a decision to move. The cottage is small, 3 steps, and I was in the hallway. The bedroom door was half open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed, both hands in her lap, staring at the window. A cup of tea on the nightstand had looked like it had gone cold. I said her name. She turned and looked at me, and for just a moment her face did something complicated. Relief and fear at the same time. The way a person looks when the thing they've been dreading has arrived, but so has something they didn't know they were allowed to hope for. "You're early," she said. "What's going on?" I asked. "Where's Stefan?" She shook her head just slightly. "He brought someone, a man. They're outside." I looked out the window. The back deck, the one I built with pressure-treated lumber in 2009, the one where we've eaten probably 500 dinners. There were 3 figures out there. Stefan, Nadine, and a third man I didn't recognize, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of blazer that looks expensive without being flashy. They had a bottle of something. Sparkling. Nadine was laughing at whatever the stranger had just said. "Who is that?" I asked. Kathleen was quiet for a moment. Then, he said he's a financial planner. Stefan introduced him. "His name is Preston something. He's been here since yesterday afternoon." I felt something go cold in my chest. Not panic, more like the feeling you get when you're reading a set of blueprints and suddenly realize a load-bearing calculation is wrong. A very specific kind of dread that comes from understanding, not from confusion. "Since yesterday," I said. "Stefan called me Wednesday," Kathleen said. "He said he wanted to talk to me about something. About us. About—" She stopped, pressed her hands together. "He had papers, Lawrence. A lot of papers. He kept saying you'd already agreed to everything. That this was just to get my signature too. That it was for our own protection." I sat down next to her on the bed. "What kind of papers?" She stood up and opened the top drawer of the dresser, the one where she keeps her reading glasses and her hand cream and, apparently now, a stack of documents an inch thick. She handed them to me without a word. I read slowly. I'm an engineer. I read things slowly, and I read them completely, and I do not skip to the end. It took me 20 minutes. When I was done, I set the papers on my knee and looked at the wall for a while. What Stefan had brought. What he'd driven up here with a stranger to get my wife to sign on a long weekend at a cottage 2 hours from our lawyer, 2 hours from anyone who might have read it with her, was a package. A comprehensive estate restructuring. The cover sheet called it. A power of attorney granting Stefan and Nadine joint decision-making authority over our finances and property, effective immediately. A document reclassifying the cottage as an investment property to be managed by a numbered company in which Stefan held a 49% interest. A referral form for a geriatric care assessment. A letter, drafted on what looked like medical letterhead, suggesting that people in the early stages of cognitive transition often benefited from having financial affairs managed by trusted family members. I am 63 years old. I passed my last engineering certification examination 4 years ago. I drive, I cook, I built a bookcase from scratch last winter. There's nothing transitioning about my cognition. He told you I'd agreed to this, I said. He said you'd talked about it at Easter, that you were worried about your memory, and you didn't want to burden me. She looked at me. You never said anything like that to me. No, I said. I never did. She nodded once like I'd confirmed something she'd already decided to believe, but needed to hear. And you were going to sign? I asked. Not accusing, just asking. I didn't know what to do, she said quietly. He had all these papers. He said it was what you wanted. He said if I didn't, it would be harder later, that there were tax implications, that we'd lose the cottage too. He used a lot of words I didn't understand. She looked out the window. He'd been here since yesterday. He just kept talking. I thought about my wife, alone here, for 18 hours, with her son-in-law and a man with a leather portfolio and a stack of documents telling her that her husband had already decided things without her. I thought about the bottle of sparkling wine on the deck. I put the papers on the dresser. I stood up. I straightened my shirt. Stay in here for a bit, I said. I'll be right back. I want to be honest about what I felt walking toward that back door, because I think people expect you to say you were furious. I wasn't furious. Furious is hot and loud, and I've never been good at either. What I was very, very quiet inside, the kind of quiet that happens when something becomes completely clear. I opened the back door. The three of them were around the patio table, papers spread between them, the portfolio open. The sparkling wine was Prosecco. I could see now. 2 of the glasses had been used. The third was still clean and turned upside down, waiting. Nadine saw me first. She froze. Stefan turned. Whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't this. His face went through several things quickly before settling on something approximating a smile. Dad, he said. He always calls me Dad. I've never asked him to. You're here early? I am, I said. The third man, Preston, Kathleen had called him, stood up slightly and extended a hand. Mr. Dornberry, I'm Preston Gilmore. I know who you are, I said. Sit down. He sat down. I pulled out the remaining chair, the one across from Stefan, and sat. I didn't look at Nadine yet. I looked at Stefan. Tell me what you think is happening here, I said. He started talking. He was good at it. I'll give him that. Smooth, prepared, layered. He talked about planning for the future, about protecting assets, about how he and Nadine had been worried for some time, about a conversation we'd supposedly had at Easter where I had expressed concerns about my health. He talked about the cottage and property values in Parry Sound and tax efficiency and the complexity of estate law in Ontario. He talked about how this was all out of love. I let him finish. How long have you and Mr. Gilmore been working on this? I asked. A small hesitation. A few months. We wanted to have everything ready before we presented it. And your plan was to have Kathleen sign over power of attorney for our finances and property at a cottage without her own counsel on a holiday weekend. It's not a transfer. It's a Stefan. I said his name the way I used to say my children's names when they were teenagers, and I needed them to understand that what was about to happen was not a negotiation. I read every page of what you brought. I know what it says. He looked at the portfolio, then at me. The smooth surface of him cracked just slightly. The conversation at Easter, I said. Walk me through it. Dad, you said, I've never expressed concern about my memory to you. Not at Easter, not at any other time. I want you to understand that I know that, and Kathleen knows that, and whatever Mr. Gilmore here was told, I'd like him to know it too. Preston Gilmore had stopped performing helpfulness. He was sitting very still with his hands flat on the table. Mr. Gilmore, I said, are you a licensed financial planner in Ontario? Yes, I'm registered with. I'll be verifying that. What's your registration number? He gave me a number. I wrote it on the back of a gas station receipt I had in my shirt pocket, the way I've written things down my whole working life. Then I looked at Nadine. She was looking at the table. She'd been looking at the table since I sat down. There was something in her face I recognized from when she was a child and had done something she knew was wrong. Not the defiance she showed when she thought she might get away with it, but the other thing, the one underneath. Nadine, I said, did you know what these documents actually said? She was quiet for a long moment. Then Stefan explained it. That's not what I asked. Another silence. I thought, he said you were worried about. Your mother has been alone here since yesterday afternoon, with 2 people telling her that her husband had already agreed to give away control of our finances and our home. I kept my voice even. She was crying when I arrived. Did you know she was upset? She looked up then. Her eyes were wet. I thought she'd feel better once she understood. She understood fine, I said. She just didn't want to sign something her husband hadn't actually agreed to. Stefan started to speak. I raised one hand and he stopped. Here is what's going to happen, I said. Mr. Gilmore, thank you for the drive up, but we won't be needing your services. I'll be following up with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority about your registration and about the circumstances under which you were engaged for this. I collected the portfolio from the table. He didn't try to stop me. Stefan, I'd like you and Mr. Gilmore to leave the property today. Not tomorrow. Today. Dad, if you'll just... I'm not finished. I set the portfolio on my knee the same way I'd held the papers in the bedroom. I've spent 31 years paying the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, and the mortgage on this cottage. My name is on the deed. Kathleen's name is on the deed. Neither of your names is on the deed. That's not an oversight. Stefan's jaw tightened. The smooth surface was entirely gone now. We were trying to help, he said. And I think, in some version of himself, he may have believed that. You told my wife I was worried about my memory, I said. I'm going to remember this for a very long time. I stood up. I took the portfolio inside with me. Kathleen was in the kitchen when I came back in. She'd made fresh tea. She handed me a cup, and we stood at the kitchen window and watched Stefan fold up his things on the deck and say something to Preston Gilmore, who was already gathering his jacket. "Are you all right?" she asked me. "I'm fine," I said. "Are you?" She thought about it honestly, the way she always does. "I will be." Nadine knocked on the door before they left. Kathleen opened it. Nadine stood on the step and looked at her mother and said, "I'm sorry, Mum. Just that." Kathleen nodded once. She didn't say it was fine because it wasn't, not yet, and Kathleen has never been the kind of woman to say things she doesn't mean. The door closed. We heard the cars back out of the drive. The quiet after that was different from the quiet before. Easier. Joel arrived Saturday with his wife and the kids, as planned. I didn't tell him everything right away. I wanted a day that was just Thanksgiving, just turkey and stuffing, and the kids running down to the dock to see if there were still frogs in the shallows. There were. There always are, longer into autumn than you'd expect. Over the weekend, while the kids slept, I told Joel. He sat at the kitchen table and listened the way he does, without interrupting, which he gets from his mother. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "How long do you think Stefan had been planning this?" I said I didn't know. Long enough to draft documents. Long enough to find Preston Gilmore, whoever he was. Long enough to build a story about Easter. Joel said, "I want to look into Gilmore." I said I'd already started. I'd spent Friday evening going through the portfolio carefully. Preston Gilmore was registered technically, but his registration was with a small MFDA dealer I'd never heard of, and his licensing category did not permit him to advise on real estate restructuring or estate planning. The letter with medical letterhead, the one suggesting cognitive concerns, was not from a physician. The letterhead was from a wellness clinic in Mississauga that offered, among other things, lifestyle coaching and nutrition assessments. There was no physician's signature, only a stamp. Stefan, I discovered through some careful searching over the following weeks, had incorporated a numbered company 6 months prior. The address on the incorporation documents was a postal box. His name wasn't on it directly, but his brother-in-law's name was, and Stefan's own holding company was listed as a shareholder. I called our actual lawyer, a woman named Patricia. No, I won't use her name here. She values her privacy. The Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I drove into town and sat in her office and put the portfolio on her desk. She went through it the way I had, slowly, and her expression by the end was the kind of professional neutral that lawyers develop specifically to avoid alarming their clients. "This is a significant problem," she said. "For them, or for us?" I asked. "For them," she said, "primarily." She outlined what we had, a document package prepared with the intent to have a property owner sign over control of assets under false pretenses, specifically under the false claim that her spouse had consented, the medical letterhead from a non-medical source, a financial advisor operating outside his licensing category, a numbered company positioned to benefit from the restructuring. She used phrases like potential elder financial abuse and misrepresentation and fiduciary breach. I wrote them all down on the back of another gas station receipt. I am not a man who enjoys conflict. I want to be clear about that. I spent my career building things designed to hold weight, to last, to do exactly what they were supposed to do. I believe in structure and in doing things properly. What I don't believe in is letting things that are wrong continue to be wrong because confronting them is uncomfortable. We filed a complaint with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario about Preston Gilmore. We filed a separate complaint with the Law Society about the estate documents, flagging the misrepresentation. Our lawyer sent a formal letter to Stefan, documenting the events of Thanksgiving weekend and making clear that any further attempt to access, manage, or restructure our assets without our written, independently witnessed consent would result in immediate legal action. Stefan called me once after receiving the letter. He said the whole thing had been misunderstood, that he'd been trying to help, that he was hurt. We'd involved lawyers. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Stefan, you drove up to a cottage with a man my wife had never met and spent 18 hours convincing her that her husband had already agreed to hand over our finances and our home. I'd like you to tell me clearly what part of that was a misunderstanding. He didn't have an answer for that. He and Nadine came to Christmas. We decided to let them for the children's sake. Because the grandchildren are not responsible for their parents' decisions, and because Kathleen and I believe that some things are worth preserving even when they're complicated. But things were different. Some things, once you've seen them, you cannot unsee. Nadine, over the months that followed, was the one who changed. She started calling Kathleen on her own without Stefan. At Easter, the real Easter, the one with no documents, she took her mother for a walk along the road while I made coffee, and when they came back, Kathleen's eyes were red, but her posture was different, lighter, somehow. I don't know everything that was said between them. I don't need to. Preston Gilmore's registration was suspended pending investigation. We received a confirmation letter in February. I read it once, filed it, and didn't think about it much after that. Stefan never apologized directly. I'm not sure he's capable of it, or capable yet anyway. People change slowly, if they change. I've built enough things to know that you can't rush a cure, only manage the damage. What I know is this. It is now July, 9 months later, and I am sitting on the dock at the cottage. Kathleen is behind me in the garden she finally planted. Tomatoes, beans, a row of marigolds that don't serve any agricultural purpose but make her happy. Our grandson is trying to bait a hook and cannot figure out the knot, and I'm letting him work at it because he needs to work at it, because some things you have to figure out yourself, because the trying is most of the point. The water is flat this morning. The loons have been out since before I was. The cottage is still ours. There is nothing wrong with my memory. I remember everything. The rotting dock we bought in 1993, the paneled walls Kathleen looked at for 4 minutes and loved anyway, the weight of that portfolio on my knee, my wife's face when I walked to the door 2 hours earlier than anyone expected. I remember what it felt like to drive north on a Thursday in October. Windows down, thinking about firewood and turkey and the good ordinary life Kathleen and I had built. I'm going to keep thinking about that for a very long time. If you're watching this and you have parents, grandparents, someone older in your life who owns something worth wanting, please hear me when I say, the threat doesn't always look like a threat. It comes in a portfolio. It comes with a bottle of wine and a pleasant voice, and documents that use words like protection and planning and what's best. It comes from people who know your name, who have sat at your table. Check in on the people you love, not just at holidays, not just when it's convenient. Check in the way you'd want someone to check in on you. And if something feels wrong, if a stack of papers appears that nobody's explained properly, if someone tells you your spouse already agreed to something your spouse never mentioned, trust that feeling. My wife trusted it. She didn't sign. That dock her grandchildren are fishing off right now. It's still there because she didn't sign. That's enough for me. More than enough. It's everything. I've been asked, since all of this came out, whether I feel angry, whether I lie awake thinking about what Stefan tried to do, about those 18 hours Kathleen sat alone in that bedroom with a cold cup of tea and a stack of papers she hadn't asked for. People expect me to say yes. The honest answer is, not anymore. What I feel now, mostly, is clear, and I've come to think that clarity is what you earn when you do the hard thing instead of the comfortable one. Here's what I know about cause and effect. Stripped of anything dramatic, actions accumulate. Every choice Stefan made, incorporating that number company quietly, finding Preston Gilmore, building a false story about Easter, driving north on a holiday weekend. Every one of those choices was a brick he laid in a wall that eventually fell on him. Not because the universe punished him, because the logic of what he was doing was always going to catch up with the man who reads things slowly and completely and doesn't skip to the end. That's not fate. That's just how things work. And on my side of it, I drove home early. Not for any strategic reason. Because Joel's truck broke down. Because I decided not to wait. The difference between Kathleen signing those papers and not signing them was 2 hours and a transmission failure on a highway outside Sudbury. That's a thin margin. It keeps me honest about how close things can get before they go wrong. What I've thought about most, in the months since, is the question of what we owe each other as we get older. Not in a grand philosophical sense. In a practical one. Kathleen and I built something over 31 years. Not just the cottage, though, the cottage matters, but a life with a certain shape to it, a certain integrity. We made decisions together. We signed things together. We disagreed sometimes and worked through it and came out the other side still knowing where we stood. What Stefan didn't understand, what I think a lot of people don't understand until they face something like this, is that competence doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up. I showed up on a Thursday in October. I read the documents. I sat across the table from a man half my age with a leather portfolio, and I asked him for his registration number. None of that required anything extraordinary. It only required paying attention, which is something I've done my whole life and intend to keep doing. Nadine is finding her way back, slowly. I think she got caught between who she loves and what she was being told to believe, and that's a painful place to be. I don't excuse what she let happen, but I understand that people can be led somewhere wrong without being entirely wrong themselves. What matters is whether they find their way back to their own conscience. She's trying. That counts for something. Joel never needed to find his way anywhere. He already knew. The cottage is ours. The dock is ours. The marigolds Kathleen planted this summer are hers specifically, which she will tell you herself if you ask. I am 63 years old, and I have nothing wrong with my memory, my judgment, or my capacity to sit at my own patio table and ask the right questions. That's not something I need to prove to anyone anymore. It's just true.